Hey guys, and welcome to week 9 of the Indy Road and the iRacing IndyCar series. So, just going to go through quick with our Mid Ohio baseline. Basically, this is very similar to the high downforce setup. I just made some pretty common sense changes to the car, and it's pretty close to um, what you're going to want to be at in terms of speed. So, this isn't my personal setup, but it's going to be more than enough to make you competitive if you're driving the car correctly. A lot of people earlier today in the strength of field race were complaining um, about like Craig's setup shop, VRS setup. I'm just going to put that out there now that these setups are not bad, and if you're getting lapped, then it's not the setup, it's your driving that is hurting you the most. So just with this baseline, I did no third spring. This is gonna help us with just dealing with these. This will decrease the ride heights significantly down the straightaways, and I can adjust the balance in a way that I generally like it to have. It's kind of a personal preference. Most people do stiff and pretty much close to zero. I liked the handling of it when I went to no third spring, and frankly, it's easier for me to just go no third spring and tweak from there rather than mess around with these spring gaps, and that can kind of get messy. So I just went no third spring, and I was able to get a pretty good balance pretty quickly. Yeah, I just went up a little bit in the rear springs too. That's just to get a little bit more oversteer compared to the high downforce setup. So overall, very similar, just common sense, lower tire pressures, kind of a iRacing special is to run minimum tire pressures always, and I couldn't tell you if that's real life or not, but I mean, minimum exists for a reason, so maybe it is kind of the boundary that they set to make, I don't know, but anyway. Radiator inlet, 70 for race, 77 for qualifying always. I don't know why they leave it open. It's going to be a lot slower that way. So those are just a few things to the setup. Now let's get on to the lap, because that's ultimately going to be the main driver in terms of how fast you go. So let's go through. So as we go through this straightaway, you're going to want to be as close as possible to this white line. Obviously, just setting you up for this entry. This is a fast left-hander coming up here, so this one it's really tricky to do for someone that's driven the car for the first time or driven this track for the first time. It's going to be kind of rough to go through this corner. The main thing is you have to just look at this marker and just turn your wheel and brush brake and just let the arrow of the car carry you through the corner. People will make two mistakes as they go through this corner. They will either overdrive it and slide out really wide and not hit this line, or they will underdrive it and end up carrying way less speed than they could. And this is not the longest straightaway, but it's a pretty sizable straightaway, so if you do either of those, you're going to scrub a lot of speed and really struggle. So one thing to note is the steering pinion. The steering pinion in the car is 7, by the way, so if you adjust the steering pinion, you can easily make it so you turn the wheel more. If you want to make it so you really have to hustle the car and crank the wheel, then go 6. I usually like to go 6, but I just rolled with this to go quick. But most people usually do 8. It's just preference. Sometimes when you're doing 6, it's kind of hard to shift if you're using like a formula rim like I am. So again, this 100 marker is kind of our turning point, and you can see we're at about 50% braking. That's another thing with this car in particular, is you have to remember that you can really brake super hard compared to other cars. So don't be afraid to brake hard, especially right when you're starting the braking. You can see um, one important thing that you'll see there is that sort of this idea that when you're transferring weight on the car, um, one analogy is that you sort of have like a point system where your tire can only take so much load, and if you're trying to brake super hard and turn the wheel super hard, you're just going to overload the tire. So basically, I'm using this brake to kind of point the car with the steering wheel, not too much, and then I'm, trail braking off, slowly downshifting to get the car to rotate, and then at that point, I'm powering down. And I did turn the wheel too much in this corner, mind you, so yes, that's the obvious. So you can see the most important thing at this point is that you need to be committed to the corner pretty much before you're even at this sort of apex here. And then, yeah, using all the track as well is really key. So you're going to be tracking out right to this yellow line. I mean, you could see I was right on the edge too of corner entry. So in an ideal world, I probably would have held onto the brake a smidge longer and turned the wheel a smidge later, but it was good enough. So this corner is the famous keyhole. So the 200 point is a really good marker to use. Yeah, so again, I'm setting this car up right on the white line and braking right at this 200 marker. And you can enter this corner a lot of ways. I kind of, based off the way the setup was working for me in terms of the handling, I had to drive the car a little bit different than I did in the strength to field race. This kind of understeered more in the entry and center than I was accustomed to, but that's just how the setup is. It's not necessarily good or bad. So you can see this is kind of the entry angle I'm taking into the corner, and you can see I'm still trail braking as I am downshifting. So this trail braking is key because that's going to help you rotate the car as you're, it's basically a really long hairpin, so you're kind of trying to carry more speed than you think on entry, and you're still using the brake to slow down as you reach the center of the corner. So you can see I'm still dragging the brake at this point, using first gear to downshift and get some extra rotation. And then, yeah, turning the wheel pretty hard to get the car to rotate here. And then, I'm pointing out for this quite late apex here, you can see. This is my apex point, and that is this exit point kind of comes out to you pretty quickly. So if you try to apex right here, you're going to go off. So you really have to have a late apex. And you can see if you nail that right, you'll get those tires right on the white line and you'll be good to go. So unfortunately, you do not get bonus points for hitting these cones, but I like to imagine so. Just a quick side note. Alright, so this is kind of a tough corner. Probably the toughest on the track, in my opinion. Which, this corner is the one that I mess up the most, at least. And you'll probably think this is one of the easiest corners until you get really, really experienced with this track, and this is kind of the corner that I mess up the most in terms of overshooting. So I think the main reason why I mess up this corner is because this 200 marker is just a little too late for me in terms of braking points, so that's why I'm probably struggling here more. But about in between the 300 and 200 marker, and look, I'm 100% braking right here. So when you're at 160 miles per hour, the car produces a lot of downforce. Don't be afraid to brake really hard, but then you're gonna have to really get off. So you can see how gradually as well I'm braking. This is as optimal as you can get pretty much. Maybe turning in a little too early, but nothing too big. But if you make a jump from like 80-90% and just go to 0 as you're turning into the corner, that is kind of a recipe for disaster. Generally, if you're releasing the brake really quickly, that'll get the car to tend to oversteer. So that can cause snap oversteer. So if that is why, then, well, if that happens to you, that might be why. So I do touch this curb. I would say you can either touch it or you can not touch it. Either way, you might be like, oh, well, there's a corner right here, but we're actually going to get back on the power as quick as we can on this apex. And right here, I'm jumping back onto it. So a lot of people, they will kind of do a later turn in and carry more speed, but the reason I like the earlier and tighter line through here is so that I can get on the power quickly and be on the power for this corner. And you'll see that this will set me up better than those other people, in my opinion. You can see I'm just kind of brushing the brake again to point the car with the downforce, and then this corner is pretty heavily cambered, so I would recommend, like, once you're at this center point of the corner, it's a pretty good time to just touch the brake. And then I did not touch the brake at the center of the corner, mind you, and yes, I know. And then honestly, when I'm powering out here, there's a little bit of stability issues that can generally happen. That's what happens when you're going through these changes. So I just barely get on the throttle here, and that's nothing more than providing a little bit of stability to the car, and then, you know, gradually going back up on the throttle to get back to full power. So this right-hander is, I'd say this section of the track is where most people lose their time, and that is, it starts off at this corner, and if you mess up this corner, then it's really easy to just have no flow and mess up the next couple corners, and, you know, before you know it, you're losing a full second. So let's go through this pretty well in depth. Unfortunately, this car and track does, I mean, yeah, I don't really have anything here. Maybe people with good graphics have something, but I don't know. Anyway, there's no real breaking point for me. Basically, I'm just getting out as wide as I can, and I'm guessing that's kind of muscle memory. Is, you know, once you're used to holding the line from the corner before, then you know, okay, once I get over to this point in the track, once I'm sitting on the left side point, maybe you could use this white line. For me, at least, I don't really have anything, so that's unfortunate. I guess you could just try to count like 1/1000 after you pass the yellow curb on the left. That would be pretty good, but yeah, I mean, it's just like natural flow, and this will take a really long time practicing, but this is kind of how you do it, and eventually you'll get there. So a lot of people at this corner, I think the main thing is you bleed lap time if you don't power off this corner. I'm setting myself up with the brush braking here, and I mean, I'm like on the throttle by the apex. A lot of people might overdrive this corner to push wide here, or yeah, I don't know. That's, you have to get on the power as early as you can here, because that will sort of straighten you out. and it'll allow you to have more momentum coming into this section. So here it is the trickiest corner for a few reasons. If you don't have a good setup, then yeah, that's gonna be a problem for you going through this corner. A good setup, you should always be able to hold it pretty much flat. So yeah, I'm kind of hugging this yellow curb, and you can see I am lifting a little bit, and you can also see I pretty much have the wheel straight too. So if you are jerking the wheel a lot, that is not going to end well for you, because the car will oversteer and over rotate, and you will go off into the dirt. Not ideal. So just be careful with that. You can also upshift early if you want to get more comfortable. Then yeah, just upshift a little bit, and that'll also help. For me at least, I'm kind of struggling doing that when I'm turning so much with the Formula rim. It's kind of hard to reach, but you know, you have to make do with what you got. So then I think most important thing with this corner is, look, this corner is cambered, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's much more advantageous to start your braking at this part of the track, in my opinion, because if you're it's just a natural flow where you can kind of point the wheel straight quicker to get to this yellow curb, and the yellow curbs are kind of my guiding point as we go. So you can see right after this curb ends, then yeah, then I'm on the brake. So, and then you can see I'm pretty much straightening the car out to get this to this curb point. You can see, I mean, I'm barely touching those rumble strips. And then once the this yellow curb passes, that's pretty much when my braking is ending. At least as a formality, I'm still trail braking a lot. So I missed the apex just by a hair, but nothing that's going to damage the lap. So this is a tricky crest. My main advice is, again, you have the throttle, and the throttle can do multiple things. Yes, you can use the throttle to power down, which is great for, you know, qualifying laps, but you can also use the throttle to stabilize the car a little bit before you power down. So that's what I did, is just smoothly go up on the power a little bit to about 45-50%, and then once this curb once this elevation change kind of settles with the car, and the wheel is, again, very little input on the steering wheel. Once that settles, and actually it did not settle here, I had to correct. So you can see even when I'm using this little bit of throttle, it can still snap. But yeah, I had to go through correction there. So I think part of this, in all honesty, is missing the apex here. You'd not want to have this much steering wheel into it, so missing the apex and kind of fighting the car off is not good. But that's also a testament to the car, that you can toss it a little bit and be able to correct it. So this corner right here, this sign is not my marker, surprisingly. I've been using a lot of signs at this track. So this little transition from the grass right here with this white line, look, I'm trying to use all the racetrack I can get out of it. So at that point, I mean, I guess you could say I'm braking at this 200 marker, but my turn-in point is right here. And then, yeah, trail braking, downshifting into third gear, and pointing this car towards the curb. And a lot of people, their setups will push out wide, and this setup, at least if driven correctly, you should hit the apex and you're powering down as pretty much 75, 80% throttle right there, and a little bit on the curb. And then this corner is another one where people love to bleed lap time, and the main advice I have is that the corner is pretty heavily cambered, so you're going to want to stay as we go through this corner. You can say I'm holding this probably 30%, 70% of this left side is not where you want to be. Even when I'm kind of trying to arc it, I'm still trying to hold this right side of the track, and that's just the camber angle, the downhill, all those things coming into factor. You want to, if you push out really wide, you're gonna, if you apex it correctly still there, you're gonna not lose that much time, but in fact you might gain time depending on what your line is, because if you go out wide you might be able to get more speed as you line the car up if you weren't lining it up as well. But you want to hold this braking. So yeah, so basically we're going to be doing relatively heavy braking here. This isn't the most heavy braking you'll see, but right after this curb ends you're braking pretty hard. And then again, we're trail braking really hard. You can see, I mean, I've been holding the brake for like 4 seconds now, and still turning the car with the brake, and we want to be on this curb. And yeah, feel free to crank the wheel. 62 miles per hour, it's an Indy car. Go ahead and crank the wheel pretty hard. And then power down once we get this lined up here with the corner exit. If you're uncomfortable with the stability here, which some people may, I mean, even I was able to crash here, then just upshift to second gear early before you hit this point on the track. Otherwise, that is a lap at Mid Ohio. So